introduction, and thanks very much, of course, to Worldwide Wednesday for the invitation to come here and speak on the anniversary of the Maastricht Treaty. But I actually found preparing for this particular talk a much more difficult task than I expected it to be. Because really the job of every constitutional lawyer, and probably the job of every active citizen, is meant to be to interrogate and criticise the people who exercise public power on our behalf and over us. And so it's the job of every EU constitutional lawyer, indeed every EU citizen, to interrogate and criticise the European Union as well. And I suppose in that sense, I'd like us all to be Eurosceptics in the sense that no public organisation is so perfect that it's beyond reproach, beyond criticism, beyond scrutiny. And none of us should be so starry-eyed as to believe that the EU doesn't have its issues, doesn't have its problems, doesn't have its crises. But of course, that sort of necessary, healthy, positive Euroscepticism is an entire universe away from what we see rampant in the UK these days, where so many of our political leaders and indeed our fellow citizens have substituted rational scepticism for dishonest and bigoted Europhobia. They don't actually care what the EU does, they don't actually care what the EU achieves, they don't even care about the mistakes the EU actually makes, they just hate it. And I suppose that, in a way, makes it all more important sometimes for people like me to not criticise for a living and actually to challenge myself and think about what it is that I do believe are the key benefits of the EU and what I do believe that it matters to me as an EU citizen. And one of the things I amazed myself by was that it must be years and years since I asked myself those questions. That shows you the type of job that I do. So, I've got 5 key reasons for supporting the principle of European integration. Each of them are closely interrelated to each other, but all of them culminate in one overarching idea, which I'll keep you in suspense about until the end. Now, the first reason is very obvious, so obvious it's going to be top of everybody's list, of course, but maybe one of the main lessons that we've learned since the 2016 referendum is that even obvious benefits can't be taken for granted. Maybe it's time that we started saying that much more loudly. Obviously, the European Union has played a, if not the central role in maintaining peace in a continent that used to love slaughtering its own children by the thousands and then by the millions. And we just need to think back over the events since the Second World War. We think of the incredible, unbelievable success of Franco-German reconciliation. We think of the consolidation of the newly emerged democracies that came out of the military dictatorships in countries like Spain and Portugal and Greece. We think of the unbelievably smooth unification of Germany and, just as importantly, its smooth integration into the frameworks of pan-European cooperation. We think, closer to my home, of the genuinely warm and close relations which now exist between the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom after centuries of hatred, and, of course, the promotion of a workable peace settlement in Northern Ireland. And we have the remarkable enlargements of 2004 onwards, in which an entire region of ex-authoritarian countries have been integrated into the mainstream of Western democracy. One of the most dishonest claims we hear over and over and over again from Leave campaigners, I hear it myself and I heard it myself on a regular basis, is that the EU contributed nothing to European peace and stability. Everything was owed to American money, American guns. And worse still is when I hear them claim that the aggressive expansionism of the EU provoked poor Vladimir Putin, for example, into invading the Ukraine or destabilising democracy across the Western world. Shame on those people who spread such silly and offensive lies. But anyway, that's my first reason for supporting the EU. It is a peace project which has been unbelievably successful in its ambition and its achievements. But the EU doesn't simply keep the European peace, and this is my second reason. The EU actually provides a forum for cooperation, collaboration between European states and their peoples, which is unique and astounding. Every day, every week, every month, government ministers from 28 European countries and elected MPs from across an entire continent meet to discuss and agree and resolve our common interests and our differences. Thousands upon thousands of national civil servants are sharing information, coordinating action, which is crucial to our safety and our security. Thousands of scientists and researchers across Europe are collaborating on projects that will improve our health, our well-being, that will increase our capacity to solve pressing economic and social challenges. And of course, millions of individuals are taking the opportunities of travel, of study, of work, of retirement in other countries and cultures. Peace and progress aren't just about the absence of violence, they're also about creating countless opportunities for people to know and understand each other better, and the EU, frankly, does that with massive bells on. Third reason, all of that member state cooperation, collaboration isn't just random or arbitrary. It's highly organised, it's carefully directed, not least towards addressing the challenges that for me as a European lawyer really lie at the heart of the EU's activities. Cross-border problems to which individual states simply cannot provide an effective solution. They can only be achieved through collective action. So, how do we manage cross-border trade so as to increase our economic prosperity but still safeguard against social dumping and the deregulation of basic social standards? How do we tackle environmental challenges like pollution or climate change that simply are indifferent to national borders? How do we fight cross-border crime or cross-border terrorism when the intelligence and the capacity to offer responses are scattered across 28 different countries? In each and every case, the answer to those questions is the same. Individual countries cannot do these things effectively. They need to act in concert. And the EU is the principal forum through which European countries provide the solutions to some of our biggest problems. Fourth reason, through the very process of organising cross-border cooperation and collaboration to deal with all of these cross-border challenges and problems, the EU is doing something else which is equally important and equally significant. It discovers, it articulates, it defends and it promotes a distinct and identifiable body of European values. They're the values that represent the particular civilization that we've built together over long centuries and that the vast majority of Europeans can subscribe to as their own. Now, of course, the right-wing Leave campaigners love to screech about the EU being a socialist conspiracy to destroy capitalism. Their little left-wing poodle allies love to screech about the EU being a capitalist conspiracy to destroy socialism. They have no interest in the truth. But what is it that the EU is really trying to articulate and represent? A social market economy that promotes, rewards competition, but also seeks to constrain and control its more unjust and destructive tendencies. A strong commitment to the protection of workers and the protection of the environment, as well as to social solidarity and the fundamental principle that the state has responsibilities towards its most vulnerable people. A political model based on liberal democracy, whereby those who exercise public power should be representative and accountable, but equally minorities should be protected from a tyranny of the majority, and all of us have certain fundamental rights and liberties that need to be protected by robust, independent and impartial courts. Now, as Emmanuel Macron has said very eloquently, you can find bits of those things in different parts of the world, but it's only in Europe that you find them together in the particular combination that we have created for ourselves. And the vast majority of Europeans can recognise and take pride in those basic values. It doesn't mean that we stop being national citizens and we have to stop being proud of our national institutions and our identity. And of course it doesn't mean that there isn't room for debate, contestation, criticism of the sort that people like me do for a living. But that's precisely what the EU is about. It's meant to be a forum for cross-border cooperation and collaboration that allows us to identify, to express, to debate and to renew our collective values in the face of shared problems and challenges. Fifth reason then, in doing all of this, the EU hasn't stolen away the sovereignty of its member states, as Leave campaigners constantly claim. Each member of the EU remains a sovereign state under international law and within its own constitutional order. And conversely, the EU isn't a state under international law, and it makes no claim whatsoever to sovereignty or inherent power of its own. The EU is the creation of its member states. It only has the powers the member states have gifted it, and the member states remain firmly in constitutional command. But more than that, one of the most fascinating things, I suppose, about the EU from a scholarly point of view is how it proves that there's no such thing as a finite amount of influence in the world. That the more power you give the EU necessarily means less power for the member states. Actually, EU membership proves that pooling resources, pooling capacity, actively generates, it creates, it spontaneously produces more power and influence for the collective of the member states as well as their individual parts. And that generative power of collective action has the potential not only to enhance and expand national sovereignty, but precisely because it gives the member states capacity to achieve things that they couldn't achieve on their own. In addition, it allows the member states to defend our values, our interests on the world stage. Let no one kid themselves, even for a second. Whether we like it or not, the world belongs to big powers. It's been like that for a long time, and it's probably going to be like that for a very long time to come. We can try and tame the international order through rules-based organisations such as the WTO or the UN, but fundamentally the world belongs to big powers. And those fundamental realities tell us another brutal truth. No European country, not a single one, not Germany, not France, not Britain, none of us, acting alone, can possibly hope to exercise decisive power in defence of our interests on the world stage. The simple fact is the EU is our global power. The EU is our representative on the world stage. It's not just articulating our values and our interests for ourselves in some internal navel-gazing exercise. It's defending and projecting our values among the rest of the world. And contrary to the usual propaganda of the Leave campaigners, it actually does it very successfully. That doesn't mean, again, that we can't identify shortcomings and weaknesses and that we can't criticise some of the choices which are made by the EU, but in a turbulent world, it's only the EU which can provide the critical mass of economic and political and diplomatic power that will protect the collective values of Europeans. And in doing that, it isn't replacing or destroying the nation state, it's actually empowering and enlarging the nation state and its capacity to express our national sovereignty in meaningful ways. So, securing an unprecedented era of European peace, fostering cooperation and understanding among states and peoples, offering collective solutions to common problems that we couldn't solve on our own, articulating a distinct set of European values and protecting those values in an unstable world. They're my 5 key reasons for supporting the fundamental principle of European integration. And what do they add up to together as my single unifying idea? It's a very simple one. If the EU didn't exist, we'd have to create it. And it's as simple as that. If there was no EU, we would have to create it because it's the only organisation which is capable of doing the jobs that we need to be done. We can imagine a different EU, a better EU, we can seek to reform and influence it, but ultimately, if it didn't exist, we'd have to create it again anyway. Thank you very much for your attention.